From my hospital bed, using my phone, I hired a night nurse named Patricia, 52, formerly a NICU nurse at Children's Healthcare of Atlanta, references like a saint's resume, and a daytime nanny to cover from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. I hired a house cleaner for 3 days a week. I called our financial advisor, a meticulous man named Douglas, who had been managing the Mercer family trusts since before I married into them, and I had a 45-minute conversation that I will not detail here, except to say that it ended with Douglas very quietly asking me if I was sure, and me saying yes, very quietly back. I had been writing a check every single month for 10 years, $660,000. For what exactly? I was about to find out. Let me explain the money, because the money is the whole story. When Garrett and I married, I was 24, he was 31. It was a wedding in Highlands, North Carolina. Tented reception, 300 guests, white peonies literally everywhere. His family did something that was presented to me as a gift and that I only later understood was a leash. His parents, Harold and Connie Mercer, sat me down 2 weeks before the wedding and explained that they would be providing my parents with a financial supplement of $5,500 per month indefinitely to help the Caulfields maintain their lifestyle, as Harold put it, looking at me over his reading glasses. Because the Caulfields, my family, had money but not Mercer money. We had a nice house in Sandy Springs and good schools and vacations to the Outer Banks. The Mercers had a compound in Sea Island and a condo in Aspen and a trust structure that required its own attorney. My parents accepted. Of course they accepted. My mother cried. She called it so generous. She started calling Connie Mercer her second mother. The checks came every month like clockwork, $5,500. 45 months per year is not how time works, but when I did the actual math, 10 years of those checks was $660,000. Not a gift, a subscription. And subscriptions can be canceled. I made the call from room 412 on a Tuesday afternoon with my fractured pelvis and my concussion and my cracked ribs, and I stopped the payment, effective immediately. Douglas confirmed it twice. I said thank you and hung up. 4 hours later, my grandfather walked in. His name is Robert Caulfield. He's 78. He drove himself from his house in Decatur, a 15-year-old silver Buick that he refuses to replace, 45 minutes through Atlanta traffic, parked in the hospital deck, walked through the lobby with his cane, found room 412, knocked twice, and came in holding a brown paper bag from Publix that had a container of chicken noodle soup and 2 packages of peanut butter crackers. He set the bag on the tray table, looked at me for a long moment, and sat down in the vinyl chair beside the bed. "Your mother called me," he said. I figured. She's upset about something with a check. I looked at him. He was looking at the soup container. His hands, folded in his lap, had the thick-knuckled look of a man who had worked with them for most of his life. He had been a civil engineer, built bridges, actually built things, which was something my mother seemed to have forgotten entirely. He said, "I told her to stop calling me. Then I got in the car." Just like that. I canceled a payment that was being made to Mom and Dad from Garrett's family trust. It's been going for 10 years. He was quiet for a moment. "How much?" $5,500 a month. Another pause. "How long?" 10 years. He nodded slowly, doing the math, the engineer in him still running calculations. "And you canceled it because she wouldn't come home." "I canceled it because I have been lying here for 4 days, and the only person from my family who has come to see me is sitting in that chair eating my crackers." He looked down. He was in fact eating one of my crackers. He set it down on the wrapper with great dignity. "Your mother," he said, and stopped. He tried again. "Your mother has always loved Bridget differently than she loves you." He said it plainly, like it was a fact about weather. I don't know why. I've watched it for 30 years and I still don't know why. Some mothers do that. Pick one. He picked the cracker back up. It's not about you. It's never been about you. I know, Pop. But that doesn't mean you have to keep funding it. No, I said. It doesn't. Her name is Naomi Voss. She is 29 years old. She worked as a client relations associate at Mercer Capital Partners' Phoenix office. She has copper red hair and a lean, athletic look, and she has been sleeping with my husband since approximately March of the previous year, which means since approximately 8 months before Ren was born, which means while I was pregnant. I didn't know this during the hospital stay. I found out 6 weeks later when I was home and walking without the crutches, and Douglas, my financial advisor, called me with information I had not asked for, but that he felt, given recent developments, I should have. Douglas had discovered it during a routine review of the trust disbursements I had asked him to audit after the hospital. He found an apartment lease in Scottsdale, co-signed by a Garrett T. Mercer. He found recurring transfers from a Mercer Capital account, not the family trust, a subsidiary account that technically had Garrett's sole signatory authority, to a personal account registered to Naomi A. Voss. 11 transfers, 11 months, $4,500 per transfer, which is, if you're keeping track, $1,000 less per month than what his family had been paying mine. He was paying for 2 households. He just never mentioned the second one. I sat with that for a while, in my kitchen, with my coffee, with Ren and the bouncer on the counter beside me, looking at a mobile of felt clouds with the focused intensity of someone working through a difficult problem. I know, I told her. I know. She batted at a cloud. I picked up my phone and called my attorney. My attorney is a woman named Cecile Fontaine. She went to Emory Law. She is 51 years old, and she wears her gray hair in a precise, blunt cut, and she has a reputation in Atlanta family law that is, and I mean this in the best possible way, genuinely frightening. When I called her, I didn't cry. I told her what Douglas had found. I told her about the accident and my mother and the canceled payment. I told her everything in the flat, factual voice of someone who has already done their grieving and is now in the operational phase. Cecile was quiet for 4 seconds. Then she said, "Do you want him to know this is coming, or do you want him to be surprised?" "I want him to be surprised," I said. "Okay, don't change your behavior, nothing unusual. How long can you maintain that?" I thought about 11 months of $4,500 transfers. I thought about, "Good morning, babe, how are you feeling?" "As long as necessary," I said. Cecile said, "Good. Angry women make mistakes. Patient women make history." I wrote it on a Post-it and stuck it to my bathroom mirror. What followed was 4 months of the most disciplined performance of my life. I was pleasant. I was warm. When Garrett came home from Phoenix, he was coming home every 10 days by then, which I now understood was structured around Naomi's schedule. I had dinner ready, or we went to Boca Lupo, which he loved, and I laughed at his stories and asked about his deals and let him hold Ren, who regarded him with the skeptical calm of an infant who has already formed a private opinion. I was, in Cecile's words, a ghost, present everywhere, traceable nowhere. Meanwhile, Cecile was building. Forensic accountants went through 12 years of Mercer Capital's financials. They found the Scottsdale apartment. They found 2 prior arrangements, one in Charlotte, one in Austin, that had apparently been resolved quietly before I appeared on the scene. They found 3 subsidiary accounts that Garrett controlled, independent of the family trust, totaling approximately $2.3 million in accumulated funds. They found that Harold and Connie Mercer, my in-laws, the ones who had so generously supplemented my parents, had known about at least one of the prior arrangements and had, in Harold's words in a text message to Garrett that the forensic team recovered, had handled it. They had been managing him for years, and I had been included in the management structure without my knowledge. She called the second Tuesday of February. By then, I'd been home from the hospital for 6 weeks. I was walking normally. Ren had started smiling, real smiles, not gas, actual recognition, and that had rearranged something in my chest permanently. Isla, I need to talk to you about what happened with the account. I was in the nursery, standing by the window, watching Ren sleep. The light came in pale and winter-thin through the blinds and lay across the crib in soft stripes. Okay, I said. Your father and I depend on that supplement. You know that. I do know that. After everything Harold and Connie have done for this family. Mom, my voice came out quiet, not cold, just level. I was in the hospital. I had a fractured pelvis. I asked you to come home. I was in the middle of... I know where you were. I watched Ren's chest rise and fall. I'm not going to restore the payment, Mom. A silence. Then, Garrett is not going to be happy about this. And there it was, Garrett, the real call. She wasn't calling because she was her daughter. She was calling because she was his. Garrett and I are working through some things, I said, which was the truest sentence I had spoken in 4 months. What does that mean? It means I love you, Mom. I'll talk to you soon. I hung up and went back to watching Ren sleep. In March, Harold and Connie Mercer hosted a dinner at their Sea Island compound for what Harold called the family, meaning himself, Connie, Garrett, me, Garrett's brother Davis and his wife Tatum, and 3 other couples from the Mercer social orbit. It was a Thursday, the kind of dinner that Harold used to hold power, where the seating arrangement communicated hierarchy, and the wines were a message, and everything was a performance of abundance. I wore a cream-colored dress. I wore the Tiffany bracelet Connie had given me when Ren was born. I knew I looked, exactly like what they had purchased when they wrote those monthly checks. A certain kind of wife, a certain kind of Mercer-adjacent woman who understood her position in the arrangement. Over the fish course, Harold leaned toward me with the benevolent, avuncular warmth he deployed when he wanted something and said, Isla, we've been hearing about some turbulence with the supplemental account. I hope that's just a administrative hiccup, I said pleasantly. Cecile is handling it. A beat. Cecile Fontaine? Mm-hmm. Across the table, I watched Garrett set down his wine glass. You say one name in certain rooms and you watch the room change. That was the moment. That was the whole moment. Connie laughed, bright and social. Oh, attorneys, they make everything so complicated. They really do, I agreed warmly. More fish? Garrett came home from Phoenix on a Sunday, and I was in the kitchen making coffee when he walked in. And he had the look on his face I had been watching for it for 4 months, and there was. The look of a man who has just learned something and is working out how much you know. Can we talk? He said. Of course. I poured him a coffee. I handed it to him. I sat across from him at the kitchen island. I got a call from Dad. He wrapped both hands around the mug. He said you have Cecile Fontaine working on something? I do. Isla, he set the mug down. If you're talking about divorce, I think we should talk first. Just us. I agree, I said. What would you like to say? He looked at me for a long time. Garrett was genuinely handsome. The kind of handsome that had worked for him his entire life, that had gotten him extensions and exceptions and forgiveness from everyone, forever. He had, I now understood, been forgiven by his family for years. They'd cleaned up behind him in Charlotte. They'd cleaned up in Austin. They'd built the whole financial structure, the supplement to my parents, the leash disguised as a gift, to keep me tractable, to make the marriage cost too much to leave. They had done the math wrong. I made a mistake, he said. You made 11 months of mistakes, I said, to a specific bank account. He closed his eyes. And before that, I said, you made mistakes in Charlotte. And before that, Austin. I kept my voice completely even. I want you to know that I know. I want you to know that Cecile knows. And I want you to know that the conversation we're about to have isn't about whether this marriage ends. It already ended. This conversation is about what it's going to cost you. Cecile negotiated for 11 weeks. I will not list every term because some of them are under NDA and some of them are simply too satisfying to share in full. But here is the shape of it. The house in Brookhaven? Mine. Outright. Garrett transferred the deed in June. Wren's trust, funded by the subsidiary accounts, the $2.3 million that the forensic accountants had located, set aside, intact, controlled by an independent trustee until Wren turns 25. Spousal maintenance for 10 years at a monthly figure that I will only describe as substantially more than $5,500. Harold and Connie Mercer, as a condition of avoiding what Cecile politely described as a significantly broader disclosure, agreed to a separate settlement that I also cannot detail, except to say that it involved a wire transfer and an apology letter that Connie wrote herself, longhand, which I have framed in my home office because it is a genuinely extraordinary document. The family that bought me spent considerably more getting rid of me. I thought that was only fair. Garrett moved to Phoenix permanently. He and Naomi are, as far as I know, still together. I genuinely wish them the specific texture of joy that they deserve. She found out about the divorce in May, before it was final, from Connie Mercer, who called her, I imagine with some satisfaction, to deliver the news. She called me screaming. That is not an exaggeration. She called me at 8 in the morning and she screamed for approximately 4 minutes about what I had thrown away and what I had cost them and how Bridget would never have done this. Bridget would have found a way. Bridget understood how families worked. I let her finish. When she stopped, there was a breathing silence. "Are you done?" I said. "Ela, your father and I were paid $660,000 to be comfortable with a marriage that your son-in-law was conducting simultaneously with at least 3 other women." My voice came out perfectly steady. I had rehearsed this. I had practiced it in the shower every morning for 2 months, not because I needed the script, but because I wanted to feel the shape of it. You took that money. You took every check. You called Connie Mercer your second mother, and when I was in the hospital with a fractured pelvis and a newborn baby, you told me your sister never has these emergencies. I paused. Mom, which one of us should be screaming right now? A very long silence. The supplement is not coming back, I said. Not ever. But I am your daughter, and Wren is your granddaughter, and what happens next between us is completely up to you. I let that sit. Call me when you're ready. I hung up. She called me on a Thursday 3 weeks later. She sounded different, smaller somehow, real. It was a short call. She said she was sorry. She said it plainly, without qualifications, without Bridget, without the Mercers. Just, "I'm sorry. I wasn't there. I should have been there." I said, "I know, Mom. I know you are. We're not fixed. We might never be fixed all the way, but we're talking. She comes on Sundays sometimes. She holds Wren, and she's gentler with me than she's ever been in my life, and I think maybe the money, all those years, made her afraid to need me back. When there's nothing to lose, you have to just love people with your bare hands. It turns out she can do that. It just took everything collapsing for either of us to find out. In September, 8 months after the accident, I had the Brookhaven house repainted. I changed the exterior from the gray that Garrett had chosen, he had been very particular about the gray, to a warm ivory. I had the kitchen redone. I put a glider in the room that had been Garrett's home office and turned it into a reading room, just for me, with good light and bookshelves and a small rug that Wren drools on with great enthusiasm. I started a company. I had been in interior design before the marriage. I had a good eye, a real one, not the performed taste of the Mercer-adjacent world, and I'd let it go when the Mercer life absorbed me. I rebuilt it. Ela Caulfield Design. I kept my maiden name. 4 clients in the first 2 months, 8 by the end of the year. My grandfather came to see the office I rented in Pont City Market, walked through it slowly with his cane, and said, "Good bones, good light. You know what you're doing," which from him was a standing ovation. He comes for dinner every other Sunday now. He and Wren have a thing. He sings to her, old songs, stuff from the 40s, and she grabs his finger and watches his face with her dark, serious eyes, like she's memorizing him. I stand in the kitchen doorway and watch them, and something in me is very, very quiet in those moments. Not numb, not sad, quiet in the way that means full. It's January, a year almost exactly from the accident. Last week, I got a call from someone at Mercer Capital's Atlanta office, a junior associate, young voice, clearly uncomfortable, clearly told to make this call, asking if I would consider a consultancy arrangement, interior design services for their new Buckhead office renovation. A referral, he said, from a current client. I asked who the client was. He said he wasn't at liberty to say. I told him my rates, which are not low. I told him my timeline, which does not accommodate urgency. I told him that my contract includes full creative control and a clause that I call the integrity clause, which means I don't change my work to suit anyone's personal preferences without a conversation, and I don't get conversations through junior associates. He said he'd pass that along. I hung up and I thought, a year ago, I was in room 412 staring at a parking deck. Look at me now. Ren is 13 months old. She has learned to walk, genuinely learned it, committed to it, and is now executing it with what I can only describe as aggressive confidence, walking into rooms like she owns them, which she does. She has 6 teeth and strong opinions about which songs get played at dinner, and she says a word that sounds like more, and one that sounds like light, and one that is clearly meant to mean my grandfather because she says it every Sunday when she hears the door, and it sounds like Pop, which is what I call him, and which makes him have to look out the window for a minute when she does it. My name is Isla Caulfield. I am 34 years old. I have a daughter who walks into rooms like she owns them, and a grandfather who drives a 15-year-old Buick to bring me soup, and a company with 8 clients and a house painted ivory that belongs to no one but me. I stopped $660,000 from a hospital bed with a fractured pelvis and a concussion and 2 cracked ribs. I did it in one phone call that took less than 3 minutes. I did it because my mother told me my sister never had these emergencies, and I decided that she was right. I was not going to have this particular emergency ever again. Somebody walked into room 412 with crackers and soup. Somebody sat with me. Somebody did the math out loud and looked me in the eye and said, "You don't have to keep funding this." I didn't have the revenge you see in movies, no screaming, no confrontation in a parking lot, no wine thrown across a restaurant. Mine was quieter than that. Mine was a phone call. Mine was a woman named Cecile with a blunt gray haircut who was genuinely frightening. Mine was 11 weeks of negotiation and a wire transfer and a handwritten apology letter that I framed and hung on my wall. Mine was ivory paint and a glider in a room with good light and a company with my real name on the door. Mine was my daughter walking into a room like she already owns it, which she does, which she always will.